The plaza in New Viridian still smelled of freshly turned soil and disinfectant, even 3 years after the fever years ended. People gathered at the daily barter market, faces bare to the wan autumn light, their cheeks the gentle jade of ordinary honesty. Around them, the rebuilt city swayed like a patchwork. Transparent synth glass towers stitched to stone shells of buildings that had survived fire, riot, and plague. Yet the strangest sight for an out-of-towner was not architecture, but color. A quick slip of a tongue might make a merchant's forehead bloom a guilty ochre, or a father's little fib about candy swirl heliotrope on his chin. Everyone could read everyone else now, and the habit of glancing at skin tones had become as unconscious as checking the time. Truth was a public utility, the elders said. The fever had taken half the world, but it had also bestowed this wakeful magic on the survivors. That was the story Issa Oren's tour guide liked to tell tourists. Issa, though, had grown up here. She remembered the terror before the miracle, when sickness blackened lungs and nobody knew who had coughed, or when, or whether they were hiding symptoms. She also remembered the first spontaneous scintillation on her little sister's face. Violet whirlpools spiraling across pale cheeks the moment Leisha claimed she had finished her homework, and how, within weeks, the same reactions appeared everywhere on everyone. Scientists still argued about whether the virus had overwritten some quiescent genomic function, or whether it was psychogenic alchemy. What mattered to Issa was that the world now treated honesty as visible biology. Almost everyone. Across the plaza, a cluster of dignitaries stepped from tinted trams. Their ceremonial coats were pristine white, but they moved through the crowd like drops of oil sliding across water, untouched, seemingly frictionless. Their faces were calm tan, their hands unblemished by telltale hues. No citizen could fail to recognize the effect. Living ink, an engineered biofilm grown from octocoral DNA, rested like liquid shadow upon their skin. It had one purpose: to flatten emotion, mute any burst of tell-color, and leave a politician or wealthy patron functionally invisible to public judgment. The ink was layered in law. Permission to wear it had to be petitioned through the Oversight Council, ostensibly to prevent abuse. Officially, it was allowed only during negotiations where a stray blush might risk international incidents, but exceptions stacked upon exceptions until anyone with money or clout wrapped themselves in the stuff. Citizens named it the cloak, half in jest, half in fury. Issa's mother called it plague-born hypocrisy. Issa simply called it a job opportunity. Tonight she would interview Chancellor Neil Kavros, the chief architect of the Border Canal Treaty and the administration's star moderate. He was rumored to sleep in a vat of living ink. The magazine Issa freelanced for, The Verge of Viridian, had tasked her with an in-depth profile, but her unspoken mission was different: expose how the Chancellor manipulated data about vaccine equity. Rumor said he planned to divert remaining antiviral stocks to a private outpost across the ocean. If Issa could catch him in a lie the ink couldn't hide, she might force the council to strip his license and topple half the cabinet. The audience was scheduled for dusk at the Glass House of Deliberation. Issa spent the afternoon rehearsing questions in the mirror, watching her own skin ripple in response. A reporter's craft had changed radically in the new world. It was almost impossible to maintain poker face. The trick wasn't to hide emotion. It was to harness truthful impulses so they flared in ways useful to the narrative. An unexpected flash of earnest coral might make a source trust you. A deliberate pulse of steel blue could convey skepticism. Issa had practiced until she could summon or smother certain shades at will, though she never managed the full opacity that the living ink provided. She arrived early, crossing the causeway above the old riverbed, where barges of reclaimed debris still floated. Security drones scanned her retinas, then waved her through the central doors. Inside, the glasshouse felt like the world turned upside down. Vines of bioglass arched overhead, refracting sunset into fractal rainbows. The staff offered her Koakura tea to settle the nerve show, a term that had emerged post-fever to describe the involuntary shimmer of skin at the edge of stress. Even minor embarrassment could strobe magenta down one's arms. Issa declined the tea. She wanted her edges sharp. Kavros entered precisely on schedule, flanked by 2 compliance officers, whose job, ironically, was to confirm his body bore the cloak intact. The Chancellor's skin looked matte, as if covered in foundation powder. The living ink absorbed the ambient dazzle, swallowing color. When he extended a hand, Issa glimpsed subtle motion, like midnight tide swirling beneath transparent film. "Ms. Oren," he said, voice warm, "your reputation precedes you." The living ink also dulled sound imperfections, Issa noticed. Kavros's cadence registered as soothing, moderate, unhurried, the perfect statesman. "Chancellor, thank you for your time," she replied. Her own wrist shimmered lemon gold, eagerness. She let it. "I'd like to keep this conversation informal." Naturally, transparency is essential in these times. He gestured toward ergonomic seats shaped like broken circles. There was no head-on confrontational positioning here, merely tangential dialogue. Issa activated her recorder. She expected a verbal chess match, but for the first 20 minutes, Kavros seemed almost naive. He spoke of his childhood on the steppe orchard, of nights spent cataloging stars, of the day the fever arrived, and his father's cheeks blossomed cinder red, a lie about feeling fine, hours before he succumbed. Kavros described his father's death without visible grief. The cloak saw to that. Issa felt her arms flush sympathetic lilac. She cursed the reaction. Emotion could cloud facts. Still, she probed. The Canal Treaty redistributes water to parched lowlands, yet critics note the desalination costs triple initial projections. Where's the shortfall being balanced? "Advanced thermocapacitance grants us higher efficiency than forecast," Kavros replied calmly. "We'll break even inside 2 fiscal cycles." Issa watched carefully. No color leaked. If he lied, the ink drank it before it surfaced. She shifted lanes. "There's concern antiviral shipments meant for the Northwest are missing. Manifest records show rerouting east. Is there a military buildup across the sea?" Kavros smiled politely. "I've heard similar rumors. Rest assured, my office remains committed to public health." Ink, 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 black silence. Issa's knuckles warmed chartreuse. Irritation. She inhaled. A direct confrontation would go nowhere. He was buffered by technology and training. She needed to pierce that seal, force a crack the ink couldn't mend. Rumor said the cloak required metabolic balance. Emotional spikes widened microscopic seams, letting truth colors bleed. What triggered spikes? Adrenaline, fear, desire. An idea dangerous and sudden flashed ember inside her. She cleared her throat. "Chancellor, I know the approved questions, but I have a personal one. Off record, if you like." His eyes narrowed, intrigued. "Go on." "Since the fever, many survivors experience heightened empathy. We read colors. That fosters intimacy. Yet the cloak isolates our leaders. How do you, personally, cope with that distance? Are you ever lonely behind that barrier?" Silence stretched. Kavros clasped his hands on his lap. The ink swirled faster, as though stirred by an invisible brush. His voice emerged softer. "Lonely? Possibly. Duty carries its own solitude." Issa pressed, sensing fresh terrain. "Have you loved someone since the fever?" The compliance officers shifted. Personal territory strayed from the agenda, but Kavros waved them off. "A fair question," he said. He leaned forward slightly. "I was engaged before the plague. She died in the third wave. Afterward, I found it difficult to pursue connection." Issa lowered her tone. "Because any connection would see through you?" Unexpectedly, his bottom lip twitched. There, a glitch. The ink wrinkled at the corner of his mouth, revealing a sliver of underlying skin. For an instant, Issa saw faint lavender pulses. In quietude, the cloak recoated, but she had confirmation. He was not invincible. She decided, then, to gamble everything. She terminated the recorder, visibly, so he knew, and said, "Chancellor, I have documentation that 62 crates of antiviral LX99 were diverted last month. They never reached the clinics. Someone close to you signed the authorizations. I suspect a black market exchange benefiting a fortified colony across the ocean. Tell me the truth, here, privately. Nobody else need know. But if you lie, I will know anyway." He froze. The ink thickened, a storm cloud smothering skin. "I see." His words came slower. "You're threatening me." "I'm pleading," Issa said. "Children need that medicine." The compliance officers moved closer. Kavros raised a hand, stilling them. He shut his eyes. Issa watched veins in his neck. A bead of sweat emerged. Sweat wasn't subject to tell color, but stress hormones could disrupt the cloak's enzyme bonding. "Ms. Oren," he whispered, "the world isn't as binary as your pigments suggest." Suddenly, alarms shattered the hush. Crimson strobe lights ricocheted across the vaulted glass. A security voice rang. "Unauthorized breach in aquifer wing. All personnel remain still." Kavros stood. The compliance officers hustled forward. Issa instinctively followed. Through the transparent wall, she glimpsed figures in charcoal clothing, scaling inner scaffolds, spray painting slogans in phosphor green. "Unmask, uncloak, unchain." Rebels. She had heard rumors of colorists, activists seeking to abolish living ink by any means. One rebel pressed a device against a containment tank. A plume of vapor hissed loose. The building's atmosphere changed. Sharp, metallic. Kavros's wine-dark eyes widened. "They're releasing solvent." Living ink relied on lipid bonds. Certain aerosolized reagents could cause it to slough off in sheets, a manufactured molt. If the colorists succeeded, the Chancellor and every inked delegate inside would stand naked under the plaza lights, their deceptions, whatever they were, unfiltered. Panic erupted. Officials darted for exits, covering faces. Sensors sealed doors to prevent unknown toxins spreading. Issa coughed as acrid tang filled her throat. Her skin prickled teal from fear. The Chancellor dragged her behind a marble pillar. "You'll be safer here." "Safer? They're attacking your privilege, not citizens," Issa replied, chest heaving. "You think stripping me will help children?" he snapped, a surge of anger circumventing his statesman mask. And just like that, the cloak began to fray. Ink along his temples liquefied, dripping like midnight tears. Beneath, furious scarlet striations emerged. Rage, yes, but also something subtler. Shame. For one surreal heartbeat, Issa saw the man rather than the office. She raised her wrist, activating her wrist cam. The compliance officers shouted. She ducked, filming as Kavros's face kaleidoscoped uncontrolled hues. Crimson, sallow green, flickers of ash-gray gilt. Gasps rose through the hall. Solvent mist had reached the other dignitaries. Living ink sloughed like wet paint. Spectators, guards, journalists, all watched leaders transform into involuntary mood rings. Some leaders radiated steady amber of sincere courage. Others flared mottled burgundy of deception, long bottled. The myriad colors painted the glass ceiling with a storm of truth. Kavros reached for Issa's arm, not aggressively, more a desperate tether. You want truth? Here, listen. She kept filming. The antiviral crates, he said, each word dragging metallic aftertaste. His cheeks flicked between bruised purple and black. They are across the sea, yes. I diverted them. Why? Issa asked, voice shaking but resolute. Because the fever is not done, he said. We have intel, a mutation rising from the southern archipelagos. Mortality rate 80%. The world is fatigued. They won't believe until bodies pile again. I stockpiled where we can mass produce quickly, away from sabotage. If news leaked early, panics would shred supply lines. I thought, secrecy saves more lives. Color-pulsed sienna, raw conviction, then splintered into streaks of cobalt doubt. Issa stared. In her periphery, security subdued colorists. Solvent vents shut. The inkless leaders huddled, some sobbing, others radiating calm aquamarine. All their secrets spilled across skin. Alliances, betrayals, quiet virtues. Kavros's voice dropped. I authorized other things too. Contracts that enriched friends. I told myself they were rewards for loyalty. Those were lies. Raven blotches spread. I don't expect forgiveness. Issa lowered the cam. She could broadcast this right now. The network feed remained live across the hall. But the scene complicates the narrative. Villainy braided with possible foresight. She glimpsed her own reflection in a fractured glass shard. Her cheeks glimmered turbulent indigo. Confusion. She stepped away, seeking clarity. Near the dais she found Dr. Yelena March, Minister of Agriculture, cradling her own arms as stripes of hopeful gold rippled. You were hoarding drought seeds, Issa realized aloud. March nodded, exposed. Because the northern farms drown, we need salt-tolerant cultivars. I feared Parliament would stall. Honest or not, the colors suggested sincere purpose. The solvent hadn't merely stripped ink. It had peeled the veneer from government itself. People inside and outside the glasshouse saw unedited humanity returning, messy and radiant. Crowds pressed against exterior panes, phones aloft, streaming the event. Issa returned to Kavros. The cloak lay in puddles around his shoes, like shed shadow. He looked older, fragile. Colors still stormed across his skin, but patterns slowed, melting into earnest russet. You could have spoken openly, Issa said. Let science guide. Could I? He murmured. Since the fever, public trust calcified. The masses claim to want truth, but one whiff of uncertainty and they riot. Living ink was the only armor left to govern. And now? Issa gestured at the prismatic chaos. Now the armor is gone. Sirens blared as external doors unlocked. Medical teams charged to neutralize any lingering solvent. Drones hovered, collecting footage. The colorists were cuffed, but their faces blazed triumphant tangerine. They had achieved their goal, to reintroduce risk into dialogue. An oversight council member, no longer inked, climbed a podium to speak. Her skin glowed steady silver. Resolve. Citizens of Viridian, she announced, voice amplified. You see us plain. We propose an immediate moratorium on cloak privileges. Emergency session at dawn. Until then, all officials shall remain publicly visible. Applause thundered from outside. Issa exhaled. Her recorder still held Kavros's confession. But context mattered. Releasing raw data without nuance could sow havoc or clarity depending on narrative. She needed more than color bursts. She needed corroborating documents, interviews, viral sequences. Journalism remained discipline, not reflex. Yet the story had already changed. The plaza outside looked surreal. Thousands of civilians, their faces swirling pastel, crying or laughing, pointing at screens streaming fluorescence of power. Judgment would not wait for newspapers. Issa knelt, scooping a droplet of living ink into a sample vial. Even inert, it shimmered with potential question. Would society discard it altogether, or commodify new stealth tech? The conflict between instinctive transparency and manufactured opacity seemed eternal. As responders escorted Kavros toward quarantine evaluation, standard after chemical exposure, he glanced back at Issa. His face bore bruised yellow of regret, blending with muted topaz of acceptance. "Tell it best you can," he said. "I will," she replied. But Issa understood the challenge. Words now competed with color itself. Anyone present had witnessed politics rendered chromatic play. She walked through the foyer. A small child tugged her sleeve, eyes wide. "Is everyone sick again?" the kid asked, cheeks pale mint. "No," Issa said, kneeling. Her own forearms flickered warm peach reassurance. "Some grown-ups are just learning to be honest." The child considered, then smiled, color deepening to rose. Outside, dusk surrendered to night, but city lights refracted off countless windows, turning concrete veins of streets into rivers of iridescence. Somewhere overhead, drones hummed, still broadcasting unscripted revelations. The world would watch, debate, fracture, perhaps heal. Issa reached the plaza where the barter stalls now sat abandoned under emergency klaxons. She recalled her mother saying, "The fever made truth a public utility." Tonight proved utilities could be hijacked, but also reclaimed. She pressed finger to wrist pad, transmitting a short notice to her editor. "Glasshouse incident. Ink stripped. Secrets exposed. Need additional column inches." Confirmation pinged back. "You've got tomorrow's front page, the next week's analysis, and maybe a book deal." She laughed. A quick release. Colors rippled outward. Sunset oranges mingling with cautious blues. She didn't bother to choke the hues. Speculation of motives would swirl, but she would meet it head on. She began composing the lead in her head. We thought color could not lie. We were right, and terribly wrong. For it was never color that lied. It was us, the storytellers of flesh, wrapping ourselves in shadows. Tonight, the shadows washed away, and we beheld not angels or devils, but fallible survivors, still negotiating the fever dream of history. Satisfied, she pocketed her recorder and walked toward home, where roofs were patched with sailcloth, and neighbors yard-gardened medicinal herbs, and somewhere a printing press warmed for the long night ahead. She imagined tomorrow. Politicians standing bare-skinned on broadcast balconies, voters reading them like novels. Living ink drained into sewers. Maybe the world would lurch toward a new equilibrium, less certain, but more sincere. As Issa crossed the river footbridge, she paused. Reflections of street lamps shimmered beneath her, painting the water with ribbons of peach, indigo, emerald, gold, the collective palette of a city learning, again, how to tell the truth. The current carried hues downstream to the delta, where marsh reeds whispered old songs. A breeze lifted her hair, cool and clean. She rested both hands on the railing, let the night air soak into her lungs, and felt her cheeks settle into steady, unremarkable viridian. The color, not of perfection, but of genuine calm. In that quiet tint, amidst the first hours of an uncloaked era, Issa Oren began to write.